waiting for one more panelist, my colleague Amar Bhattacharya. Welcome to this event of the Coalition of Finance Ministries of Climate Actions. We are very delighted to have you here today and would like to thank the French team, the summit team for the new Global Financing Pact for hosting this event today. Today we'll be launching the Coalition for Capacity on Climate Action, or for short we call it C3A. And we will listen first to the welcoming remark from the French representative, Eric David. After that, we will introduce you to the highly valued panel today. And also, without further ado, I would like to invite Eric to the floor. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I will do it in English. A lot of things have been said since the beginning of the morning here in OECD and also in the Stock Exchange building in Palais Brongniart. But I will repeat one crucial thing one more time. Our transition to climate neutrality will not be possible without massive investments, especially in developing countries. And we need to shift billion to trillions, it's obvious. And obviously, too, this investment will include a public share, but this public share will not be enough. It's not enough to shift to trillions. And this is precisely why President Macron wanted to convince this summit in Paris today, just to launch discussion of new sources of funding and new ways of mobilizing financial flows. And this is also precisely why there is a specific place for finance ministries in the coming years. I work in the French Treasury for more than 25 years, and I'm totally convinced that finance ministers all over the world have the expertise to mobilize economic tools likely triggers this leverage effect by giving the right incentive to the private sector to shift financial flows to low carbon and climate resilience activities. And I'm sure too that ministers of finance have the experience and have economic, budgetary, fiscal levers to create innovative solutions, to adapt their economy policy tools, to put in place budget assessing their impact on the environment, to raise sovereign obligation attached to low carbon spending. And it is also in Ministry of Finance that it is possible to design taxonomies, to design transition plans. So it is a crucial place. And then sharing best practices on the implementation of these tools in the Ministry of Finance is precisely the coalition's work and expertise. And that is really at the center of the Helsinki principles that we all signed for. The coalition has already done remarkable work to share these good practices and innovative tools. And there is a remarkable and comprehensive publication which was made last year with a unique guide about that. And while the coalition is welcoming new members regularly, we also need to better understand our developing partners' domestic priorities. And we also need to identify innovative tools. So with the Coalition for Capacity on Climate Action, which is co-led by the World Bank, we have an important job to do. And exchanging of experiences and strengthening the Ministry of Finance capabilities will be key to coordinate good investments plan and mitigate side effect for the most vulnerable. So as France, we are particularly proud to host the launch of this coalition today, and I will stop there. And without any longer, I hand over the floor to the co-chair, Ralien and Masyita, in order to introduce the coalition of capacity for climate action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric, and welcome, Amar. Now we are going to listen to the remarks, pre-recorded remarks by the co-chairs of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. Please play the video. Thank you.
As Ministers of Finance, we have a key role to play in the delivery and acceleration of climate action. Through economic strategy and vision, fiscal policies and budget management, financial regulation and oversight of the financial system. The issue of climate change or the policies relevant to them can be quite new for those working on these topics. And to be able to act with a sense of urgency and the speed required to provide the appropriate responses, we need more knowledge as well as capacity within our institutions. That's why we believe it's critical to support climate-related capacity building of those finance ministries. And as co-chairs of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Actions, we will scale up the support needed in close collaboration with global, regional and local partners. If we are to realize a new global financing pact, we need workable solutions, practical implementation and strengthened climate capacities across the board. The Coalition is here to accelerate these efforts. We have no time to lose.
Therefore, Sigrid Kaag and I, as the co-chair of the coalition, are proud to announce the coalition effort in developing capacity building through the Helsinki Principle number 2. Within the Helsinki Principle 2, a program called Capacity Creation Coalition for Climate Action, or C3A, and Capacity Building Catalog will be created with the finance minister around the globe. This program would represent the actual implementation of the coalition's guide on strengthening the role of Ministry of Finance in driving climate action, specifically to address a full range of climate-related economic and financial policy with a whole of government approach. We would like to express our gratitude to all 88 members and 26 institutional partners who have joined the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. It is indeed pleasing to witness the increasing number of ministers and Ministry of Finance staff and their growing commitment to establish robust collaboration and conducive environment for addressing climate change and climate finance issue. We believe that acknowledging the role of finance ministries is not enough. Strengthening the capacity and capabilities of the ministries of finance in various aspects, including leadership, coordination, as well as human and analytical capability, is an absolute necessary. Owning and carrying out our roles as ministries of finance will not be walk in the park. There is an old saying that goes, "No one saves us but ourselves." Therefore, let us commit further to enhancing our own capabilities together to protect ourselves from the impact of climate change.
Thank you. A lot has been done to reinforce capacity on climate actions, not only in the finance ministries. This session will actually take stock of this experience and also aim to understand how capacity creation program would need to be adapted to tackle the specific need of finance ministries in the uncertain macroeconomic condition, especially like Eric mentioned before on the investment side that we need. We would also aim at identifying some key priorities in terms of capacity building need to finance ministries in the next 5 years. In the context of this Paris Summit for a new global financing pact, how do we leverage the existing capacity of finance ministries to ensure that they can collectively take center stage in the climate action? What do they need to scale up in terms of action? My colleague, co-chair Sherpa, Ralien Bekkers, will introduce our valued panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Masyita, and welcome everybody. I'm very happy to introduce our amazing panel of high-level panelists for this session. First, we have Fatima Denton, the director of the Institute for Natural Resources in Africa, based in Ghana, and Institute of the United Nations University. We have Amar Bhattacharya, the senior fellow in the Center for Sustainable Development, housed in the Global Economy and Development Program in Brookings Institute. Juergen Voegele, the vice president of the World Bank for Sustainable Development. Morgan Despres, executive director of the European Climate Foundation and former head of NGFS. And Tom Heller, professor at Stanford, founder of the Climate Policy Initiative, CPI, and strategic advisor to the WTW. So we will now go to the first panelist. Fatima, if I may ask you, that your institute provides specifically capacity development for African countries and African stakeholders on issues related to natural resource management. And the question is for us that how the ministries of finance are involved in these capacity development programs, and what are your specific views on the needs of ministries of finance? Over to you.
Hello. Okay, it works. Okay, so thank you very much. Just to say that we are a knowledge institute, one of the 13 institutes of the United Nations University. So we come at it in a very different way, so I just want to clarify how we do it. I'd say we work very closely with policymakers, not just policymakers in the Ministry of Finance, but we work with different ministries because we're a natural resource management outfit. So we conduct studies. Much of what we do is really based on foresight analysis. And we basically try to understand what are some of the issues that countries in Africa are going to be faced with. And then that information is shared and relayed to policymakers. So I'll just give you some concrete examples of our intellectual footprint in terms of where we've been. We've been working very much on issues of stranded assets because we've come to the realization that many countries in Africa are discovering oil and gas, and many countries are already quite rich in coal. And so the idea here was to say, how do we provide evidence-based research that would serve as an alert? Because we had a sense that this was not so much on the radar of African policymakers. And so that research is generated looking at several countries where these resources are. And then basically the analysis we came up with was that many of these countries in Africa will need to start thinking about what is their exit strategy. Our research tells us also that the mechanisms, the financial mechanisms, since we're talking about finance, perhaps just to tailor this around that, they're not in place. So when we talk to policymakers about renewable future and renewable energy, they basically tell us that the the mechanism for finance are not fully in place. And so therefore, the idea that they may have to forego their resources without a sense of what are the alternatives that they can use as a buffer is not there. And that is also very, very difficult. If you take countries like Namibia that have actually well endowed in hydrogen, the capacities they need are really significant because you have to now invest in the infrastructure that will support the deployment of hydrogen. And that infrastructure will take time. So everything from the production side to the transport to delivery. to fueling stations. All of those are essential to the value chain. And countries are in a very difficult situation in Africa because they are saddled with debt. There is also the fact that it is a continent where the tax base is actually very narrow, very small. Fiscal returns in terms of some of these fossil fuels are not what they used to be, especially during Corona. So many countries saw that their economies, the fiscal returns, the fiscal space shrunk. So these are some of the big difficulties, the necessity for infrastructure, the necessity for knowledge, the fact also that you're asking countries that are very much dependent on these resources to forego that without putting something solid on the table has a lot to do with the aspect of equity and climate justice. And many countries in Africa are very, they're very categorical about the fact that they don't see these resources as resources that they would want to forgo right away. So these are some of the things that we've been doing, but I would say that the challenges are there, especially in terms of capacity building and in terms of enabling the countries that we've been talking to really get the relevant skills and to be able to use those skills to design a future. One last thing I'd say just to close, we've realized that this cannot be done without planning. So I think the more we invest in planning and encouraging countries to diversify away from fossil fuel and to be able to identify what that diversification might look like, what are some of the options that we could put on the table, I think it takes a long while, but it also means that countries are at very critical decision points. They want to know whether they have to go along with natural gas or whether they can begin to exploit their critical minerals. So without planning, I think we're going to be heading in a blind alley, basically. We need to basically start planning, and I think planning is even more useful in Africa because of the fact that the policy cycles can be somewhat erratic. That aspect of capacity, I think, is hugely needed, and also to just make sure that we are relying on local technology is also innovation. I mean, when we talk about mitigation, very often much of what we do is sort of exported from outside, and so for me, the importance of ensuring that ministries have got relevant capacities is also find the opportunities locally, so the solutions are, we're looking at local solutions, we're localizing solutions. I think if we start looking outside, then that value chain is broken, and Africa finds itself in that perennial cycle of producing but not adding value, and that has been the whole history of Africa. So I think people are excited about some of the new opportunities, but again, Africa needs to sit on that table where it is able to have agency and able to also begin to identify the financial architecture that would work for it. Thanks.
Thank you, Fatima. I would like to go to Amar now. Amar, you have been involved in the coalition's work on this paper that you recently contributed on the role of finance ministers in climate actions. What do you think would be the priority capacity needs based on your analysis, maybe in the next 5 years?
Thank you, Masyita, and thank you, Ralien, for having me here. It's always a pleasure, and it was inspirational to hear your two ministers. I mean, I think, it tells you where the coalition is, so congratulations. Let me just begin with a personal observation, since I had to trek across from the summit. It took me a long time to get here. So I was going to say that, the theme very much from the summit, and it's a very important theme, is which has now come through quite strikingly, is climate change entails tremendous risk, but it offers tremendous opportunities. And I think that sense now, which to me is striking how much it's accepted, is something that finance ministers really need to also grasp and keep center stage. So I want to say a little bit about the exercise, and I begin by actually giving the total credit for this exercise to my colleagues, Nick Godfrey and Annika Heckwolf. They are both sitting here, many, many, many hours and days and weeks and months of hard work, but in a very strong collaborative spirit. And, you know, the guide really is a reflection of self-learning by the coalition and bringing the best analytical knowledge at this point in time in climate action to the fore. And I say at this point in time because in this area we are all learning. It's not like there is a ready-made script. We are learning, and there is great value, therefore, in learning from each other, and that's what this exercise was. You know, there were 30 countries involved. You know, there were 30 plus expert contributions. You know, Nick knows these numbers better than I do, but, you know, huge number of consultations, huge amount of engagement. And that was in part the value of this exercise. The journey was as important as the production of the guide itself. But at the end, we have now a very credible base of knowledge that we can build on. And I think that's going to be the value. And I'm going to say, therefore, the tremendous synergy between that work and the work that you are proposing to take forward. As the minister said, you know, the functions of finance ministers are critical because they hold so many of the necessary levers. And I break them down, and they're very much centered in the guide. It's around strategy, vision and strategy, and within that, very centrally, the transformation of the economy that is necessary. It's not just about some kind of broad strategy, but clarity on what goals have to be achieved and how you get to that goals. So transformation is the name of the game, and transformation has two dimensions: scale and pace. So one implication for finance ministers right now is, are they prepared to act on the scale and the pace that is necessary? And honestly, this is challenging for finance ministers. It makes them uncomfortable because that's not what they are used to. But for the coalition, it's extremely important to recognize that if we are talking about transformative change, we are going to make finance ministers uncomfortable, and that's okay. Second thing that they have a key role, of course, is they hold the levers of fiscal policy. And I want to emphasize in fiscal policy, my colleagues in the fund would always emphasize the importance of carbon taxation, and indeed Principle 3 is about that, and it's absolutely at the core. But we must also, and I'm sure Juergen will emphasize this, talk about the tremendous power of getting rid of harmful subsidies. We have to talk about the tremendous power, of course, of revenue policy and ultimately the totality of expenditure policies. And finally, of course, finance ministers hold the keys to finance. Now, we all think of finance ministers as public finance, but actually they have tremendous levers on private finance. And the kind of work that you, Masyita, are doing in the JET-P says that the role of blended finance and the structures we will use are going to be tremendously powerful in this. So the guide has brought more than 140 learning examples. It shows something that I personally take away, that if you look at it, not only are practices quite diverse, but there is tremendous potential to move to the frontier. You can see how many countries are doing things at the frontier, and you can say, why not me? And that's, again, a big value of this guide. And in going forward, I won't take too much time, but in going forward, I see three key elements or drivers of change: the knowledge creation and understanding what needs to be done, knowledge exchange, and in that there is more knowledge creation. And finally, of course, there is capacity building. This initiative has tremendous potential. It is very significant that it is anchored in the World Bank, because the World Bank has so much country activities also. But the initiative is independent of the World Bank, which is also very good. And it needs to be done in very, very close partnership with lots of endeavors. And certainly we, speaking for Nick Stern and myself, would like to see this as us contributing very actively to the work of the guide, not only in the past, but going forward as well.
Thank you so much, Amar. And this is a great bridge to the next speaker, which is from the World Bank. So Juergen, over to you as the VP for Sustainable Development, Vice President. You have, of course, been following for a long time the policy dialogue with governments on transition and climate issues. We now have at the World Bank the CCDR reports that also looking at the state of the trends of climate policies and their impacts. How can capacity development programs help achieve some of the objectives and recommendations from the World Bank's reports or these country assessments? And will the C3A program facilitate the involvement of finance ministries in climate action?
Well, thank you, Ralien and Masyita. Great to be here with all of you this afternoon. This is the after lunch hour, so we're trying to spice this up a little bit, get you smiling and keep awake. I'm a really great fan of this Finance Ministers Coalition for Climate because we know that without the finance ministers, it won't happen. I think it's very clear. And I remember very fondly 4 years ago, 5 years ago now almost, in Bali when the first conversations happened, how do you set this up? We didn't want a mirror of the G20 process, where at the end you need to come up with a joint declaration and you have to have an agreement on things and you typically end up at the lowest common denominator with things rather than getting things moving. So this peer-to-peer process is gold in my view, and you need to keep it at all cost. Don't expect major commitments as a group. Yes, the more you can commit individually, the better. But this group should not drive towards consensus building. It should actually become a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. So fantastic work so far. I think you've really managed to do this well, and you need to continue to do this. Rest assured, the World Bank will continue to be there to support the process going forward, certainly under the new and very dynamic leadership. Fantastic work. I will build a little bit on what Amar was alluding to. Fiscal policy matters a lot. And there is, even this morning, there was a lot of talk about what can the international community do to put more grant money into the system. How can we get the private sector more engaged and more inspired and really unlock the trillions? This is all hugely important. I spent 2 hours this morning, actually, in part of lunch, with the CEOs of the world's hedge funds, the Larry Finks of this world, and the sovereign wealth funds, combined management of $27 trillion, as they like to remind us. And they're all saying, oh, we can do more, we want to do more. And frankly, a lot has happened in the last 18 months, to give them credit. They're starting with the disclosure. 18 months, 2 years ago, there was 25% disclosure on kind of the upper level of emissions. Now they're going to tier 3. Now they're going to 70%. They're very determined to do that. So there is movement there. What used to be more of a greenwashing, and I'm being very honest, exercise is now getting into phase 2.0. I certainly had the sense, listening to each one of them, that there is serious interest in getting this right and getting more of it done. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a one-way street. It's not going to be a straight line. Larry made this extremely clear. We need to be clear that there are parallel processes happening. And what happened in Europe with the war in Ukraine, the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, has been a setback. More investment in coal, more investment in fossil fuel. We need to be realistic. This is not going to be a walk in the park. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I actually want to talk about is what you alluded to. Everybody says there is no fiscal space. Okay, everybody's whining and saying, oh my God, there's additional grant money, and when's the private sector going to solve my problem? We just did a report at the World Bank that's called Detox Development. And we looked at how much of the fiscal sources that are out there are used in a productive way and which ones are used in a counterproductive way. And we have subsidies out there for the energy sector, for the agriculture sector, and for the fisheries sector, which total about $1.5 trillion a year. Amar didn't mention this number, but this morning at the opening, he was talking, the world needs 2.4 trillion per year over the next several years to 2030 to make a serious dent on the climate challenge that we face. And at the same time, the same governments are spending 1.5 trillion on subsidies, most of which are not helping with this at all. In fact, they are detrimental to the climate outcomes. Our estimates is they cause about $6 trillion of damage. Okay, just let that sink in for now. So it is not the case that there is no money in the kitty. It is the case that it's not spent in the most productive way. And we live at a time, and I get the political economy issue, I get the politics of all of this, but just because we were doing something for the last 30 years doesn't mean we have to continue to do it in the same way for the next 30 years. We have to rethink this. And the line is not to say cut subsidies, because politically that's not feasible. In fact, subsidies are increasing as we speak. They have been increasing over the last few years. So this is not an easy and not a trivial matter, but it's not impossible. So we are talking about repurposing those subsidies, not cutting them. You can give, certainly in agriculture, which is an area I know a little better than the energy subsidies, you don't have to take away money from the farmers, but you can give it to the same farmer to actually have a different outcome that gives you climate co-benefit, health co-benefits, environmental, nature conservation co-benefits. It is politically absolutely feasible. And since you asked what is our experience, we are having these policy dialogues now with a growing number of countries that in the past, when you would walk in and say, look, your agricultural subsidies are bad and, get rid of them, they would just say, thank you very much, show you the door. Forget that. It's not politically not possible. We're no longer doing this. We're saying keep the support, because farmers need support. With the onslaught of climate change, farmers are being hammered with floods and droughts and heat waves and what have you. So they need the support. So it's not about cutting it. It's about giving it in a way that reduces the footprint. We can talk about this in detail. You can grow rice in different ways. You can produce cattle in different ways, which are the largest climate emitters in the agriculture sector. The methodologies are out there. So rather than incentivizing bad behavior, you can incentivize good behavior. And you still support the farmers, and you still have your political economy and your votes. These are the kinds of things that we hope that this new facility will help governments to unbundle, to unpack, to look into what are we doing right now, how can we do this differently without losing our political constituencies. We don't have enough time to go into the details, but if you have a chance, look at the detox report. It actually is pretty striking. We are not far off the target that Nick and Amar keep telling us that the world needs. This is doable. It needs the private sector. Yes, it needs more philanthropy. It needs more grant money to unlock certain investments. Yes, it needs all of that, but it also needs a rethink how we use our public resources. And the ministers of finance are the key to that as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Juergen. We're going to shift to Morgan. So Morgan, you have been the founding head of the NGFS, and also now you're the executive director for European Climate Foundation. The questions is that, to your experience, what should the coalition promote in order to build knowledge on climate policies, and also to enable the strengthening of finance ministers' action on climate?
Thank you for having me. So I could start with a memory of the good old days when we kicked off the NGFS 5 or 6 years ago. And I remember at the time, we were growing rapidly, and we had the feeling ministries of finance were lagging a bit behind. Or at least it was more difficult. And so we tried to understand why. And I think there are two reasons. First, there is a structural reason, which is that as a Ministry of Finance, you are elected. So, of course, you want to be re-elected afterwards. And so everything you do is much more sensitive. It's much more, it's trickier than a central banker. You touch upon very difficult things, fiscal policy. You were referring to subsidies, etc. So sort of things that could kick you out of office quite quickly. And besides, also the kind of things which are very tied to sovereignty. And clearly, it was certainly more difficult for those ministries of finance to discuss about those things together. And the second difficulty, probably as I see it, was that it's difficult. It's difficult because, again, you have a specific complexity in fiscal policies and how to design the right incentives. And you were referring to, Amar, it's not only about fiscal policies, but also industrial policies, competition policy. So it's a huge thing. It's not always easy to do. There is a specific complexity in there. And that's probably why the value of the C3A network is so important. In those particular cases, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. And it's always good to talk to other colleagues, peers, which have tried. Sometimes they have made mistakes. and they have learned, and they can give you things that are that work in some cases, some other things that work in other cases. And if I compare with the NGFS, this is the big value that members enjoyed with the NGFS. They could be there in a forum where they could share in confidence about the obstacles they were facing. And sometimes even they had some very practical, down-to-earth discussions like, what is the proper, reference you're using for that or that particular case? What kind of data are you taking a look at for your specific supervisory policy? So it's definitely good to have this place where ministries of finance can exchange in confidence. And I think this is the case for the coalition at large. And it's also good that they have this analytical capability or backbone that could provide the little thing that is missing for ministries to go the extra mile. And for that reason, I have to say, if I'm completely honest, this is probably what we were missing at the NGFS, having this sort of analytical capability that could be there and provide support to the network as a whole. So I'm very excited to see that this C3A network is there, that he has a strong brains behind it and strong support. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing how things are being held in practice. Maybe I should have said as well that the European Climate Foundation, our CEO, Laurence Toubiana, is co-chair of the scientific committee. Is that right? Or advisory committee? Yeah. So we also, somehow we have some stakes in there as well.
Thank you so much, Morgan. That's excellent. And thank you for that collaboration on both fronts. So we go to our final panelist, which is Tom Heller. Tom, so as a founder of the CPI, the Climate Policy Initiative, and a strategic advisor, you've been closely following the transformation on finance in relation to the climate question. You also work a lot in the Asian region, which of course is a critical and a key player in the global decarbonization strategy. What are, in your opinion, some of the emerging topics that you see firsthand that finance ministers really should embrace? And how could the C3A program help tackle those strategic issues?
Thanks a lot. Is this working? Yes. A lot has been said already. I first want to add my voice to congratulating the bank and everyone associated with the foundation of this organization, because finance ministers have been missing parties for a very long time. I'm so old that I actually was present at Rio and Kyoto, and it was apparent by the end of 1997 at Kyoto that while foreign ministers and environment ministers who dominated those early day negotiations were extremely well-meaning and very capable, the absence of the finance ministers from those establishing events was absolutely critical and quite obvious. There was a brief moment, I'll point out, Amar may remember, in around 2011, 10, 11, after the collapse of the the Copenhagen negotiations, when finance ministers really were brought back in to what the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon at that point called the Advisory Finance Group. And it was stellar. I mean, you had Christine Lagarde, then you had Larry Summers and Gordon Brown, and and absolutely, and Tarman. It was a brilliant group and a privilege to be there. And they actually created an agenda, a lot of which has just been picked up in the Barbados proposals about taxing international shipping, for example, and using that as a source, or starting to do various types of insurance wraps around bond issues so that if countries do suffer damage, they can continue to make payments on their sovereign debt, which can lower the cost of the debt, cost of capital, quite substantially. But I would say honestly, in the last 10 years, as all of us have witnessed the semi-privatization of a lot of climate through various forms of net zero and ESG and TCFD activity that engage the private sector in a number of ways. But at the level of regulation, it also moved things toward the financial regulators rather than financial ministers. And I think that's the origin of NGFS in that period, and all that is good, but it's time to bring finance ministers back in, and that's my main message. Is it difficult for finance ministers to attend to this under current conditions? Absolutely. I mean, I agree with what Juergen said, but there are structural conditions. It is a lot harder to deal with this under very high interest rates that we're now starting to face, and under the credit conditions that call for political economic shifts, rather than, you look at my country, the IRA certainly has provided a wide series of subsidies to low carbon. It's also increased the subsidies to fossil fuels at the same time. So the political economy of this is challenging. I would suggest that the methodological instruments that finance ministers have now are not really adequate to planning over long time horizons. We could talk about that more. And the incentives are always very difficult. Because what we're looking at is a situation in which there is a tremendous upside, as Amar and others have described, but no one really wants to manage a situation where you've got a very substantial downside that you can get blamed for. And that's true both on physical risk and transition risk. And I would argue that the essence of what has to be done by finance ministers and others across the government who collaborate with them is the problem of how you manage a transition in which you are trying to wind down on a fossil economy that is deeply, deeply integrated into the fiscal systems, into the labor systems, into the productive systems, while at the same time you wind up a series of substitutions in industry, in agriculture, certainly in energy. And the problem is if you wind down one without building up the other in an appropriate way, you really can cause very serious fiscal instability and government and damage to your economy. And so the question is always, who wants to take on that job? Maybe the most difficult incentive question is it's not clear who wants that job, but it's pretty clear that they don't want other agencies doing it in their absence. And we get this very difficult problem of how to manage these structures. So the last thing I would say in these remarks, I don't know if I'll have a chance to say more, I would focus, if I were finance ministers, at a time in which we are gradually seeing a winding down of attention to things like ESG calculation, which are basically counting up emissions. And I think we are starting to see more attention given to transition pathways and managing the risks of these different pathways that can be followed. And in addition, I would say that beyond transition pathways and thinking about the methods and the operations of actually doing that, the other question that I think is hanging over all of us at the present time is the explosive growth of carbon markets, particularly in the voluntary carbon markets. Because in effect, if you just think about a carbon market for a moment, it means you're buying a piece of paper that says somebody somewhere is doing something to offset the emission that you are now able to put into the atmosphere. And if that transaction doesn't work, or if you really don't have any remedies because there is no credit-worthy party in the transaction, what you're going to see, and what we are seeing, is a real explosion of the issuance of these pieces of paper that somebody says are offsetting the emissions that I am going to continue to put into the atmosphere. And I don't think we can come up with a real financial plan and a real structure that finances and deals with the risks of carbon, that this winding up of a low-carbon system and synchronization of the winding down of a high-carbon system demand if everybody is playing financial games in an unregulated market. And that's about what we're seeing right now. So let me stop there, and I'll save the questions about methodologies for minutes that we probably don't have. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, all the panelists, for a very insightful discussion. We have 7 minutes left, so I will ask each of the panelists to give maybe a minute of reflection to complement what has been said or has not been properly pointed out, and also what actually needs to be done in the next 5 years for finance ministers to actually do this strategic transformation or the big push for us to actually align with the Paris Agreement and all the target. Maybe I'll start from Juergen and go to Morgan. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Very quickly, we only have 6 minutes and 50 seconds left. So just 2 observations. I think finance ministers need to begin to really own this and get into the thick of it. I remember a conversation with the mayor of Helsinki. All of you will remember that Finland was the first country that committed to 2035 net zero. And so we had this roundtable, and the mayor of Helsinki said, my government, we have 146 indicators across. Someone mentioned all of government, right? This is not a sectoral issue. Every branch of government needs to be involved if you want to decarbonize. We have 146 indicators. This was halfway through the pandemic, and when the revenue flows had changed and everything else. And we measure every year each one of those, and everybody is accountable for their own indicator across government. And so we were saying a year and a half into this in COVID, yeah, so how are you doing, with revenue flows drying up, etc.? Is everyone track on 142 and we're working on the other 4? Okay, which really blew my mind. And if we are not on track halfway through, we will make sure that we compensate so that we are on track at the end of the year. That is really hands-on government and leadership. So I found this extraordinarily impressive. In Finland, of course, every situation is different, but Helsinki has 30% coal. So it's not like it's an easy one for them to change things. So very clearly, this is very important to really take this to the next level. What was the other point you were just talking about? Yeah, no, maybe I'll come back in a second. I wanted to add one more thing, but it'll come to me in a second, okay? Amar, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks, Juergen. So I think, ultimately this is also about institution building. And institution building takes time. It's about capabilities, as the guide points out very clearly. And it's useful to, identify what are the capabilities that finance ministries need. I didn't talk about it in my intervention, but it is a very central part of the guide. And it's something that on the capacity building, if you're thinking, we need to be able to think that through. Second, I'm the only person on the planet that's been to every G20 meeting since it was formed in 1999. And I have been to G7s, etc. And I can say that it's now time, and I was talking to Ralien about it, it's now time for the coalition of finance ministers to start benchmarking, to do what Juergen was saying, but, to have the courage to say, we can be collaborative. This is not about name and shame, but at least, it would help you to start thinking about where we are on the key criteria by which we would judge efficacy of climate action. So that's a little bit of a challenge, but I will leave that as a thought.
Yeah, so just coming back on the carbon credits, right? This is the Wild West, and it's not working the way it should be. But it should not stop us from trying to get there, because without it, at the end of the day, we will not succeed. It's not the solution, it's not the panacea, but it's got to work. So at the World Bank, we will try to get beyond where we are right now and create asset classes that will actually hold up to scrutiny and cannot be misused for greenwashing and for double counting and all the things that are associated with it right now. It's going to be challenging and we're going to be shot at. But I think it's important to really take that to the next level. And that includes also carbon warehousing, basically having a globally tradable market, which we are totally far away from right now. There's 80 individual markets right now that are more or less functioning or not. We have price differences from anywhere between $1 and $2 to $170. So none of this is functioning. But I think we do need to invest in making it work.
Thank you. So I think quite a lot has been said already. What comes to mind listening to everybody is that, Africa, for me, seems to be a continent that has huge opportunities. There are no legacy infrastructure for start, so it's not a continent that needs to begin to start retrofitting, its energy systems, etc. I think it's also important that a lot of the things that we want to do better, like energy efficiency and all of those things, you know, there's still a huge room to do that in Africa, again, because I said the infrastructure is not there, or if it's there, it still has quite a way to travel. But I also think that we need to pay attention to issues around ownership, because if Namibia has hydrogen and needs to now deploy that hydrogen, and then there's so much funds coming from outside, how much of that hydrogen deployment or the structure of it does Namibia own? You know, I think issues like that could be quite difficult in terms of countries' ownership and their ability to basically think about the returns on investment for the infrastructure that they're putting in place. So I think what I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't also provide support to countries so that they can develop their infrastructure, but also tie their hands so that at the end of the day they're not able to enjoy good returns on these investments. Research, I think, is fundamentally important. I don't think we've talked about it, but in Africa, that's the research infrastructure is not in place. And a lot of things we're talking about, if it's carbon capture and storage, if it's hydrogen development, if it's about the critical green minerals, these aren't things that we can do without research. So research would be fundamentally important. I think innovation for me is also very important, but I want to say that, you know, let's, as we were talking about reimagining a new future where finance ministers can play part, where the financial architecture, the global financial architecture that's already quite skewed, some would argue, against developing countries. We have to also think about how we can open up spaces for innovation and how that innovation could be actually conceived within local contexts. Local communities, local entrepreneurs have a lot to offer. And so this whole discussion around finance should also find ways of connecting with local communities and innovators as well. So at least we can enjoy that full growth that we want to see happen. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll be brief, which means I can do nothing more than provoke people. Juergen, I agree with you very much on the need to do something about carbon markets. I don't think it can be done on the basis of multiple scope accounting, and these are issues that we can come back to the World Bank with. It needs to be fundamentally reformed. What was initially a temporary problem that we tried to deal with through the clean development mechanism is now exploding again after it fell apart once, but I certainly think we should take it up. I think it's incredibly important, particularly from the developing country standpoint, to realize how much trade and trade issues are about to fall down on people, whether it's the US IRA, which is full of local content, and all kinds of geopolitical difficulties. I work in Asia. People are caught between the United States and China in a way that's completely untenable at the present time. But when the compensating border mechanism adjustment comes in, then we will see how clever we can all be in trying to deal with the needs of low-income countries. I'll just say very quickly, I can't imagine how transition planning, which is being done by leading corporates, leading banks, leading sovereign wealth funds around the world, can be done and add up to something until it begins to be done in alignment with countries who have strategic interests and need to think about the way in which they will move themselves from a high carbon to a low carbon economy. Indeed, I don't see how corporates can really make sense of their own obligations until they understand which of the near infinite number of pathways there are between where we stand and what a low carbon economy would look like, unless they do this in some greater degree of alignment with governments than is currently the case. And the last thing I would say is that methodologically, I don't think working off macroeconomic models, for those of you who are geeky about this whole thing, in planning is ever going to work. I think you need much more granular models. And we are, to be truly provocative as my last remark, we're 10 years into a disorganized scenario. We have to start to create scenarios that understand that there will be continuing geopolitical, macroeconomic, and political shocks on top of somebody creating a homogeneous carbon price across the world, which is very unlikely to determine the future of transition. Thanks.
No, thank you. So, yeah, we already over time. So very quickly, just one word to underline again the importance of experience sharing, knowledge sharing, to level up everyone. It's really something I saw at the NGFS. I really recommend it to happen. And to underline also what you were alluding to, Tom, is this question of cross-border effects, impacts of policy measures. Somehow it needs to be examined, considered somewhere. It could be at the G20, but I'm not so sure it's working that well. It could be elsewhere. It could be in that particular coalition. But indeed, they shouldn't only have a domestic approach to that. We are living in a still globalized world, and there are some spillovers across the board. So good to take that into account as well.
Thank you all so much. This was, I think, a very lively discussion with very interesting aspects that we will need to follow up on in further discussions with also the finance ministers through the coalition. So we're at the end of the event, and we'll go through some very final remarks on behalf of the Dutch and the Indonesian co-chairs. So we first, of course, want to thank you all. It's been a great, full room here to listen to these thoughts, and I hope you can also take those with you as you work in your roles and look at what your role is in taking this forward and what we all together will need to do next. So we heard some really, really important things from the panel. So let's go first to Fatima, who, for example, highlight that we really are now at the very important decision points. So we need to have those capacities to be able to plan for the transition and also look at the localization of the solutions. Then from Amar, we heard also the importance of the guide, because we did launch as a coalition a very important guide. We have some QR codes actually around the room that you should scan so you can access it and read it and take it forward, bring it, spread it around. And also the key role of the coalition of finance ministers, and that we need to emphasize that we are in an economic transformation, or we will need to embark on that and have a very critical role for the finance ministers. Juergen spoke about the coalition should help a race to the top, and that the World Bank is helping also countries to look at the effective use of public resources, including through this new program that will directly support our finance ministries. Morgan then spoke also on the importance of the analytical support that the C3A will provide, and how important networks and insights from the NGFS, for example, are, that we need to collaborate together. And Tom, you've shown us how the discussions have advanced, but also that it's critical to bring the Ministries of Finance and ministers back to the table, step up their role in the transition, despite the very, very real challenges. So this event today also marked the launch of the C3A program. This will be a very important part of the work of the Coalition of Finance Ministers. As the new co-chairs together, Indonesia and the Netherlands, we want to increase the focus on capacity building, because we're having all these discussions, very important discussions at the political level, but we also need to build the capacities and capabilities at the technical level in the ministries to be able to take forward all these important discussions and have the basis that we can meet the climate ambitions of the Paris Agreement and of our finance ministers. So we have C3A now as a very important part of it that is launched as of today, and we will be starting to implement as soon as possible. And in addition, as co-chairs, we'll continue to expand the work on capacity building, including what we also developed as of this week is a catalog of capacity building programs, because we have 26 institutional partners, and they also are part of our network, and we want them to work more closely with our countries, almost 90 now, almost 100, to work also on the ground on the impact that we want to achieve. Because in the end, it is about, we bring together a powerful forum of finance ministers, but what can they do together? How can they move the needle? How can we make sure that they can take this back to their countries and work together and achieve the impact on the ground that we need for the Paris Agreement targets? And speaking of Paris, we are in Paris for the Paris Summit for a new global financing pact. So I think it's very important to also realize the importance of this moment. We've convened from all over the world, and we really feel the need and the urgency to step up the efforts to address these infrastructure and capacity issues to take serious climate action within the Ministries of Finance. We need this to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement that was made there about almost 8 years ago in 2015. So thank you all so much for today. Thank you for the fantastic panel. Look forward to working with you more as we are advancing the Coalition of Finance Ministers, as we are implementing C3A. And let's also thank the French team for hosting us and for being here. Yeah, it's been really great to be with you all, and let's get to work. Thank you.